Welcome to video number 5, where we look at the use of the Old Testament in Zechariah's song in Luke chapter 1. And today we're going to look at the covenant with Abraham. So we're going to first look at our verse to pick up on where we left off last time. And again, this is Zechariah praising the Lord. And he says this: to show the mercy promised to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies, and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And so to better understand this passage, we need to look all the way back in the beginning. To understand the covenant with Abraham in its context of the Bible, we need to go back to Genesis 1, the first chapter of the Bible. And we see in Genesis 1 that God created humanity in his image to rule over the world as his stewards or as his managers. So they ruled the world, but under God's ultimate kingship. Humanity was to multiply and fill the earth so that all of creation was full of God's image bearers, full of God's image, reflecting his praise back up to him. But humanity in Genesis 3 rebelled against God's rule over them. Humanity wanted to be their own rulers, their own kings in charge. And that's what sin is, of course. And so then they're expelled from the Garden of Eden, from God's presence. Cain then killed his brother Abel. So Cain and Abel are the first children of Adam and Eve. Cain killed Abel, and the rest of humanity degenerates from there, really. Eventually, the world gets so bad that God floods it because, as it says in Genesis 6:5, every intention of the thoughts of humanity's heart was only evil continually. But God spares Noah, and he restarts creation with Noah's family. But Noah sins just like Adam and Eve do, and humanity retains the sinful condition from Adam and Eve that's been passed on from generation to generation. Man then disobeys God's command to fill the earth by uniting together to build a city and a tower that reaches to the heavens. And this is the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. God then, to thwart humanity's purposes of uniting together in opposition to him, he forcibly scatters the people by confusing their languages. So when we get to the middle of Genesis 11 with the conclusion of the Tower of Babel, sin appears to have the final word with humanity. As sin has become organized, it's become rampant and universal throughout humanity. But we see in the opening of Genesis 12 that sin does not have the last word. God calls an unknown, pagan, older man to leave his homeland and go to a place that God will show him. And that's what picks up the Abrahamic covenant, which we see in Genesis 12. And let me read that for us right now, where it says this: Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so God promises to bless Abram, or eventually he becomes Abraham. But this blessing is not just for his own sake. God does not just bless Abraham so he might have a rich, amazing family, but he blesses him so that he might be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. So through Abraham's descendants, God will reclaim his creation. He will undo the effects of sin. And in order to do that, God promises to Abram land, descendants, and blessing, or land, seed, and blessing. And so the story of the Old Testament is one of awaiting fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. By the time of the Exodus, Abraham's descendants, they've multiplied, they've formed the nation of Israel. They eventually then go into the promised land and conquer it, as we see in the book of Joshua, but they never are actually a blessing to the nations of the earth. They've multiplied, they're now in the promised land, but they're still not a blessing to others around them. The book of Judges shows how the nation of Israel becomes like the nations around them rather than being a blessing to the nations around them. So the people of Israel act more like the nations in their sinful ways, rather than being a blessing to those nations and showing them what it is like to be the people of God. So then Solomon's reign comes closest to fulfilling the promise to Abraham, where Israel is numerous, they dwell in the promised land, and they even bless the other nations of the earth. So the Queen of Sheba comes to hear about Solomon's wisdom and see how God has blessed the nation of Israel. But that fulfillment in Solomon's life is short lived, because after Solomon dies, a series of kings rule, most of whom are unfaithful to the Lord, as we talked about when we looked at the Abrahamic or the Davidic covenant. The people of Israel are then eventually exiled from the land. They're reduced in number and they're held captive in a foreign nation, in the nation of Babylon. Their plight after the exile hardly seems like a fulfillment of the covenant with Abraham. But God is faithful and true, so his promises may be delayed, but they will always be fulfilled. Zechariah signals in his words that God has not forgotten his promise. The birth of Jesus will fulfill this promise that he made to Abraham over 1,000 years before Jesus was born. Paul writes eventually in Galatians 3 that those who follow Jesus become inheritors of the promise to Abraham. And Jesus is the one through whom the blessing of Abraham goes to the nations. And so when Zechariah says that God will show mercy that he promised to our fathers, to remember his holy covenant, the oath that he swore to our father Abraham, he's reminding the people. Luke is reminding his readers that this promise made to Abraham to be a blessing to the nations of the earth will ultimately be fulfilled in this child that is born, Jesus, the Messiah, who comes not to just bless Israel, but to bring a blessing, his blessing to the nations of the earth, to bring them into a relationship with God. And so as we look at the use of the Old Testament in Luke 1, we see that he's drawing upon these promises made hundreds and even over 1,000 years before to show that the fulfillment is now. This long-awaited promise has now come to the nation of Israel and ultimately to all the nations of the earth.